Good evening, everyone. My name is Anastasia Rivers. I'm the host and founder of New Attitude Television Show, Inc. We're here this evening with a gubernatorial debate, and I'm so elated to have them here in our small and humble studio. We're going to go into different topics, but first I would like to introduce our platform gubernatorial candidates. This is Mr. Warren Mosler, Mr. Moleto Smith, and Ms. Soraya Coffelt. I could never get to pronounce that name right, but welcome and thank you for coming and supporting our cause, which is to encourage young people to get more involved in the political process, to encourage them to register, to vote, and maybe someday run for office. You never know. So our moderator is Attorney Chivonne Thomas. She's a board member. And Ms. Verdell Peterson. She is a political analyst. And they're going to be the ones that are going to be taking turns to give the questions, and y'all will answer the question accordingly. What we decided to do is put the questions in a bowl, and we put it on the table, and you will start picking the questions from Mr. Mosler, go on down, and then the next round will be Mr. Moleto Smith, and so on. So we just want to have you all to just sit back and relax and follow the process. But before that, I want you all to take time to introduce and say why you think that you will be the first pick and the right pick for our next governor, starting with Mr. Mosler. You have 2 minutes.
Okay. Oh, we got a timer. Okay. Thank you very much. My name's Warren Mosler. I moved to St. Croix in 2003, about 15 years ago, with my wife Elizabeth, who's in the audience. And we are living out our sunset years in paradise. While I've been here, I've noticed a few things. And I do things as a matter of conscience. And so it's like if you're walking down, I use the example of walking down the boardwalk and you see somebody drowning and you're a good swimmer, you might offer to help as a matter of conscience. Because if you don't help, if you don't offer, and the person drowns, you can't sleep at night, okay? Your life is ruined. And so when I look around, I see the problems facing the Virgin Islands. I see people struggling with their WAPA bills. Now, I can pay my WAPA bill, but other people aren't so lucky. I see people struggling with the schools. Okay, my children are grown. I don't have children in school, but as a matter of conscience, I feel bad about the schools. When I see these issues, that's one thing, but I also come up with solutions for these issues. And when I have the solutions, as a matter of conscience, I feel compelled to run for office, to present these solutions, to give people an opportunity to fix what I believe are the problems. Now, let me give you an example. When I see children without school supplies, as governor, in good conscience, I cannot buy 6 new cars. Okay, I just can't do that. It isn't going to happen. In fact, if I get elected, you're going to see 6 new cars up for sale on eBay the next day. Again, that's just the way I am. So let me give you a little bit of my, I've got 8 seconds left. So anyway, look at my solutions, listen for them tonight, and if you like what you hear, I'm asking for your vote. I'm number 7 on the ballot. Lucky number 7. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Moleto A. Smith, Jr., and I am the gubernatorial candidate with the team of Smith Frederick, Hubert Lorenzo Frederick. We are number 6 on the ballot, and I'll start with some housekeeping and then go into why I think it's important, first of all, for young folks to get involved with the political system, and why it's most important to choose or select vote for number 6 in the general election. Our website is www.sf2018.net. For those of you who may be watching or listening or view this in the future, all of our information is on our website. our bios, our 9-point plan, our very comprehensive strategic visions for the Virgin Islands can be found on our website. I am 54 years old. I am a product of the Virgin Islands and the Caribbean. My mother is deceased. As a matter of fact, this today makes the 10th year of the burial of my dad, and and healthcare for both of them is a challenge, was a challenge and an issue, and that compels me to put forward a healthcare agenda that I'm sure we'll be talking much more about. I am 54 years old. I'm married for 20 years, have one daughter who is a graduate of the University of the Virgin Islands. I'm the former Deputy Interim and Acting Commissioner of the Virgin Islands Department of Human Services. I'm the current Executive Director of the East End Medical Center, which is the largest private nonprofit primary care facility in the St. Thomas, St. John area, serving over 8,000 persons. This year is really about three choices, and I think that each of us need to hone down to the three choices. Either we go back in the past and pull back folks from the past, we look at status quo, which isn't working, or we look to the future. And if you look to the future, we need freshness, and Smith Frederick is that freshness. Thank you, and I look forward to our discussions.
Okay. Good evening. I'm Soraya Coffelt, and my running mate and I, Dwight Nicholson, we're number 3 on the ballot, and we are the team for victory on November 6, 2018. As I mentioned, my name, Soraya Coffelt. I'm running because I strongly believe that there are many qualities that your next governor must have. But first and foremost, the governor must have a compassion and a love for the people of the Virgin Islands. Without that, the governor cannot be a good leader. So with the compassion and the love, of course, there must be a vision. And a leader must have a vision. Where is the leader taking the Virgin Islands to in the future? The next governor will be the governor who takes the Virgin Islands into the decade of 2020. Are we going to be a successful Virgin Islands, or are we going to be limping along as we have been for many, many years? Our vision is that we are the economic leader and we are the economic powerhouse in the Caribbean. We are the #1 place to live, work, and visit in the Caribbean. It is a grand vision, but that's what visions are. They're grand visions. Our team also brings hope, hope for a better day, hope for our young people, hope for our children, hope for our seniors, hope for those who are struggling, who are mentally ill, who are disabled, and who tend to be voiceless. And what is the hope? The hope is of a grander Virgin Islands through the electing of our team, number 3, the Coffelt Nicholson team. And lastly, we bring the experience, because in order to achieve the grand vision and to bring the hope, you must have experience. And I believe that our team has the most wide, varied experience that we want to put into use for the people of the Virgin Islands and actually be public servants to the people of the Virgin Islands. So thank you very much. We're number 3 on the ballot.
As mentioned, we're going to have the candidates select the questions from the bowl, but before that, they have 1.5 minutes to answer the question. When they pull the question, they're going to have time to read it, and you're going to hand it to the first person is Verdell Peterson. So you're going to hand it to her, and then she will read it, and then you'll answer. We'll start with Mr. Mosler.
The question to Mr. Mosler, under Government Employee Retirement System, GRS, number 1, other than injected into sum of cash into GRS, what would your administration do to revitalize the failing GRS system? Other than injecting large sums of cash into GRS, what would your administration do to revitalize the failing GRS system?
Is there a second part? No, just the one part. Okay. Okay, so the question is the GERS in 1.5 minutes. Number one, I'm considered globally an expert on this subject. Last year at this time, I was in Toronto advising a $200 billion teachers' retirement fund. My fund that I managed had over $3 billion of client money and $30 billion in assets. And to interact with the clients, we had to understand implicitly what they did and how it worked. So 4 things, hopefully I've got 1 minute to get into GRS. Number one, we authorized $600 million of rum cover-over bonds several years ago, but did not sell them. Okay, they're still there, authorized, and they cannot be sold today because our credit rating is low, but they can be contributed directly to the fund, and that's what I would do. I would contribute the bonds directly to the fund, so the fund will get the principal and interest of those bonds, which comes from the rum cover-over. Okay. Number two, I would give people who are looking for their lump sum payments, I would give them their money. The people want their money back. I was at the GERS meeting. There were hundreds of people who wanted their money back. I would give it to them because the GERS saves a lot of money by giving people their money back rather than meeting all the payments. Okay. Number three, the GERS can buy the delinquent property taxes from the government. The government gets cash. The GERS gets a superior investment to what it has now. They pay 8%, and there's a social benefit in that people no longer will be driven out of their houses because of property tax delinquency. The GERS doesn't need the money for 30, 40 years. And number four will come in the next time I get a minute.
Pull or?
The same question.
Oh, the same question. Okay.
Would you like me to repeat?
Yes, please.
Other than injecting large sums of cash into GRS, what would your administration do to revitalize the failing GRS system?
The government employees retirement system is at a catastrophic state. And the catastrophic state started many years ago, and it's based on 2 basic elements. One, there has been significant early retirements that had not been funded. So the system started to bleed money slowly over a period of time. The second is that over the last few years, the last administration specifically, there was a large attrition of approximately 1,400 individuals who were terminated or left the system. The system is based on a certain number of active employees to inactive or retired employees. So when that ratio that should be 3-to-1 is now 1-to-1, there has to be a fundamental change. And what the Smith-Frederick administration is proposing is, one, we must move to a 2-tier system, one that focuses on a 401k type of product, and the other that deals with the management and the way that the management culture in GRS is set up. So what we would do is focus, one, as we are elected, on day one, we would put together a transition team specifically for GRS. It will involve the judiciary, the legislature, all of the principal stakeholders, and they will be charged with coming up with a feasible plan for GRS so that when we are elected, our financial team would look at these options and determine what would be the best legislation to submit to the legislature to reform GRS.
The question again? Rather than injecting large sums of cash into GRS, what would your administration do to revitalize the failing GRS system?
My answer is based on all the town hall meetings that I went to. There was one in St. Thomas and one in St. Croix, as well as the forum that was held here at Carambola by GERS along with its experts, which are the actuaries. The actuaries are the ones who calculate how much time we have left in GRS, and it's supposed to be about 2023 or 2024 when the system will fail if a number of revisions are not made to it. I studied the plans that GRS had. I read another study called the Mosler study that was actually purchased by the governor, and these are the different options. One, cut the benefits for Tier 1 and Tier 2, and we cannot do that. The second option is a 401k that Mr. Smith said, and the actuary said that we cannot do a 401k system because then the government is taking money out of the system and paying it directly to the individual employee. So that doesn't help at all. And the third, what the actuary suggested to me when I went up to them and asked them, what's the bottom line? They said the best thing to do is go to the Department of Interior, go to the Department of Treasury, and ask for a very low interest, 3% loan for about $2.8 billion, which will bail out the system. It's an unfunded liability that's creating the problem, and that's what we have to find the funding source for. Thank you.
And the second question under the topic of GRS, and this begins with Mr. Mosler. Do you support the pensions of governor and lieutenant governor being funded by the general revenues instead of from GRS?
Okay. Ultimately, the government is responsible for both of them, so ultimately it makes no difference. If the GERS runs out of money, then the government has to pay. So either way, the government's paying, whether it's paying directly or through the GERS. So let me use the rest of my minute to make a couple of points. If you noticed before, I proposed no cuts in benefits and no increases in contributions. Okay, the fund can be solved without those. No cuts in benefits, no increases in contribution. The experts are wrong on the unfunded liability. And the reason they're wrong is because they come from the states who have a different tax structure. We get to keep our own income taxes, the states don't. And we brought in actuaries from the states who just overlooked that fact. So the way it works is if you get paid $3,000 of GERS money, and I'll just use an example, you might pay $1,000 back to the government in income taxes. So the government gives you $3 and you give them $1 back. How much did you cost the government that month? You didn't cost them $3, you only cost them $2. If I give you $3 and you give me $1 back, you only cost me $2. They have overstated the liability by that much. It's probably around $1 billion of overstatement. All right, now, what we have to do going forward is to make sure all GERS money paid by the GERS to retirees that comes back to the government for income taxes stays with the GERS and doesn't get spent on other things. And I will do that as governor, and the system will be solvent.
Notwithstanding what my colleagues have presented, the fact of the matter is that resolving GRS is a political question with financial dynamics. And it will never get solved unless the stakeholders, all of the stakeholders, including the plan sponsors, come to the table with good, solid, firm, and disciplined leadership to address how we move forward. We have retirees and retiree organization, that is an advocacy group. We have 2 tiers of employees who work next to each other getting different types of retirement. We have equity questions. We have issues of whether or not the legislation must be required. And that in and of itself is a political question. So, the Smith-Frederick administration, I will state this again, will on the day of election, as part of our transition, pull all of the stakeholders together with a charge of looking at the various options based on studies, based on best practices, based on expert opinion, but also based on what is feasible to move through a legislative process, because nothing will change without legislative action. It's unfortunate over the years that the issue of GRS has become a political football. Many candidates over the years have developed approaches that sound good, but in actuality, it requires the community and the stakeholders coming together. Thank you.
Would you read the question again, please?
Do you support the pensions of the governor and lieutenant governor being funded by the general revenue instead of from GRS?
Absolutely not. And I raised this point quite recently when the governor met with a group of retirees in St. Thomas. I had the opportunity to ask a question, and I asked the governor directly, would you immediately submit a bill to the legislature to have your pension and the lieutenant governor's pension paid out of GERS rather than the general fund? And what he said was the pension was not paid out of the general fund, but some interest-bearing account. And I responded, despite the fact where you claim the pensions are paid for the governor, lieutenant governor, would you agree to immediately have a bill submitted to the legislature authorizing payment now or changing payment now out of GERS? And he said no. We would. And why? Because a governor should be in the same position as the people. I believe if a governor knew that his or her pensions were at risk because the GERS system is at risk, then that governor and lieutenant governor will do their utmost to make sure that that system is functional and is fully funded. And this is the big problem because their pensions are not part of the GERS, so it doesn't matter to them personally. And I'm affronted with that because if you're a governor and you have compassion and you want to lead the people, you should be in the same boat as all the people are and should not get any special treatment. Dwight and I, as your next governor and lieutenant governor, will not be seeking any special treatment. We are one of the people. Thank you.
Two questions.
Our question is as to hurricane preparedness. The question is, are you satisfied with the recovery process after Hurricanes Irma and Maria?
The short answer is we are far behind where we should be. So I would say a qualified no. The government of the Virgin Islands is required to do a few things. One of those things is to ensure the safety and preparation of its people during times of disaster and during times of civil unrest. There is something called the Territorial Emergency Operations Plan. I'm familiar with it because I helped write that plan. I served as the interim acting and deputy commissioner of Human Services and also as the mass care coordinator for the government of the Virgin Islands for almost 20 years. Looking at that vantage, I see that there are so many deficiencies, and part of those deficiencies related to the fact that the best people, the most competent people, folks with the experience, were not tapped into and used because many of them were terminated. So when the disaster came, we had many people who never had the experience of a storm, never had the experience of what it takes to integrate both your local assets as well as integrate with the federal government to provide the assistance that's required. So what ended up happening is that the federal government became the lead in many areas when the local government was supposed to ask for that assistance. But because we failed to plan, we failed to train appropriately, we failed to execute and update the plan that was required, we were not in a position to actually take care of our people in the way that they should have. Thank you.
The question is, are you satisfied with the recovery process after Hurricanes Irma and Maria?
Absolutely not. And our people have suffered and continue to suffer as a result of the lack of preparedness by this government. And how do we know that the government was not prepared? Because we saw all the disorganization after the hurricanes hit. There, on St. Thomas, there were 3 distribution centers after Irma, and that is unconscionable. People were waiting in long lines, senior citizens, women with small children, very, very long lines. I repeatedly said, why don't you open up the distribution centers to churches, synagogues, mosques, all over the Virgin Islands to provide food directly to the people, to provide water directly to the people, to provide tarps directly to the people. It wasn't until months later that they opened up a few churches. And if you're going to make people stand in long lines in the hot sun, and then when they get to the front of the line, they're told there's no water, there's no food, they're out of tarps, that's unconscionable. People were suffering. This governor did not even go into the shelters until a long period of time. How do I know that? At least on St. Thomas. Because I went in and I was reading to children at the main shelter, which was Lockhart School. And the only time he ever came there was when the governor from New York came. And I was just leaving the shelter when the governor arrived, and I saw the big SUVs. So there was a total dysfunctioning government afterwards, and it's very upsetting to me and the people who suffered as a result.
Okay, the short answer is no, and I just read the federal studies that came out and showed that the recovery is way behind what it was for Hurricane Hugo, and it's just not even close. And we all know from the schools and the hospitals and now the sewers backing up in Charlotte and Maui, everything's been let go. Things haven't been touched since the storm in way too many cases. Now, I also want to give you another problem we have, and that is we've got a government run by retribution right now. And what you'll know what I'm like, and as governor, I name names and I tell it like it is, full transparency. So I had my ferry there. It was the only boat running. The others hadn't been harbored properly or something. And I immediately had my captain, Roger, call Vitima, and we turned the boat over to them. We volunteered the boat at no charge to them to use. They turned it over to FEMA, who started running the boat back and forth, and I believe it was the only contact at the time. Well, after the storm, FEMA said they would pay for the expenses for the boat. So we added up the expenses and we sent them a bill for $43,000. They approved the bill, and then they said, but we have to send it to Vitima to approve it. It's still federal money, but they have to approve it. And it went to Mona Barnes, and she would not approve the bill. She said, you volunteered the ferry, you don't get paid, you're a volunteer. It's like, Mona, if you volunteer for the Army, you get paid. And this is federal money. The money I get, half of it goes to you as income taxes. You're cutting off your nose to spite your face. The governor was on the same side, and we've never gotten the money.
The remaining part of this question is 2 parts. What would you have done differently during the recovery from these 2 Category 5 hurricanes? And what are your administration's plans to ensure disaster preparedness for all Virgin Islanders?
The standard is that you live in a state of being ready at all times. It's called all hazards at all time preparedness. So what I would have done is what I actually did at my health center. We trained there all through the year. We established call-down lists for all of our staff. We prepared our staff because they could have been first responders since they're doctors and healthcare professionals, and prepared them. We went and we looked for our staff after the storm, and we ensured that we had medication. $1.5 million worth of medication we brought in so that we could serve the people of the Virgin Islands after Hurricanes Irma and Maria. The short answer is that we have to have a culture of high competence and execution. We have to have a culture that we raise the bar and ensure that the things that are within that job spec to do are done. We have a Vitima, and under Vitima there are several emergency service functions. Under the emergency service function that deals with public health, that's number 8. And they never met for the year. So I would ensure that Vitima, all of the emergency service functions, meet, that they're well-trained, that they exercise their plans, that they coordinate with the community groups that are responsible to support their mission, and most importantly, that we educate and prepare the public of what may come in a timely way so that they're not caught by surprise.
The question again, please.
Surely. What would you have done differently during recovery from these two Category 5 hurricanes? The second part is, what are your administration's plans to ensure disaster preparedness for all Virgin Islanders?
I believe our government got lazy because it was responsible for preparing for any type of a disaster, and we know hurricanes come regularly every year, but it got lazy, and it also had a responsibility to prepare the people of the Virgin Islands, and that's through public service announcements. And we saw the results, as I mentioned. What we would do differently is there's the incident command system that is used everywhere. My running mate, Dwight Nicholson, was trained in the incident command system, so I would rely on him. I would have experts in that system. We would be prepared. We would be proactive. And importantly, we would have many, many shelters so our people do not suffer. Opening it up to the churches and the mosques and the synagogues, thank you, and so that our people can be served. And who knows better who are the people that have the children and the seniors and the sickly, but the pastors and the priests and the imams and the Jewish leaders. But what we would do is be proactive and make sure that we have a number of different distribution centers, and we would be prepared. We would be already working with FEMA, with the federal officials. We would have our National Guard, of course, prepared. And one of the things that the National Guard service members really suffered was a lack of payment. We have to ensure that we have enough money set aside. We can't be limping along, assuming that we will always have money to pay things.
Something about disaster preparedness? Number one, the big change, I think, no matter who gets elected, is we'll hopefully have a governor who cares. When the governor doesn't care, this is exactly what happens. And when all the emergency money is spent on something else, and then when an emergency comes up, there's not a penny for anything, these are the consequences. And so the other thing is, look, it comes down to lack of funding. We have ideas, we know what to do, but they all have to be paid for. We're going to walk in on day one with a $200 million deficit, $150 million of unpaid bills, probably be unable to meet the first payroll, and probably have 4 federal officers sitting there saying, we've got your desk, you're over on the side. We've got a scorched earth policy going on right now to make sure that there's nothing left for the next administration. Look, I've had 45 years in financial markets. I have a plan to get through that. We'll be talking about it with some of these other questions, hopefully. And it's just critical that we can fund our obvious needs. And that's where I feel my expertise lies, my experience lies, and my ability to move us forward. To get out of a hole, you have to stop digging. And right now, we're still digging the financial hole. And it can be reversed, it can be done, and I'm looking forward to day one to get started doing it. Thank you.
No, I don't need the mic.
Oh, for the bowls.
Okay, there are
It's my turn first.
2 more questions under hurricane recovery and preparedness, FEMA. The first question, do you think it was a good idea to move 911 from under the Virgin Islands Police Department to FEMA?
It was or it will be?
Do you think it was a good idea?
Oh, it was a good idea. I'm very concerned with FEMA. We have seen, as a result of the 2 hurricanes, its lack of performance. Even to date, people calling in to 911 and the director of FEMA always giving excuses. A gentleman in St. John called 911 and his brother ended up not being able to receive medical services and passed away because no one answered the phone at 911. I believe there was a recording that was given. And it's critical. I don't have any confidence in VITEMA. I believe that it's a good that it was done, but not the way it's being run now. And that's what's critical. You have to have a director who understands what VITEMA is all about. And I keep talking about experts. That's what Dwight and I will have. We will have experts, people trained in the incident command system. And if you're trained in the incident command system, you're frustrated, extremely frustrated because of the lack of preparation, the lack of follow-through, the lack of following the directives of the incident command system, which is done all over the United States. And people are prepared to respond to disasters. So if VITEMA was up to par and it had a director who was concerned about emergencies and had people trained under him or her, and the incident command system was a system that was being followed, yes, it is a good idea. But the way it is set up now, it's really a tragedy, and people should not be calling 911 and getting recordings. Or my understanding too is if you're in St. Thomas, you call 911, it's answered by an operator in St. Croix. Thank you.
Okay, we have a management problem and we have an organizational problem, and it's not just VITEMA, it's every level of government. I don't think anybody thinks that getting new schools, getting modular schools is going to cause our education to go from the bottom to the top in this country. Okay, I don't think anybody thinks that getting a brand new hospital is going to change the medical service where you're not going to have to wait 6 hours in the emergency room. Okay, we have a management problem across the whole thing. We're experiencing a total failure of government right now, and it's accelerating into the election. So it's not this institutional structure of VITEMA per se. It's how it's staffed and it's how it's managed. And that is a process that has to change, that will change. There are people who study public finance in school, understand how to do it. They are not the ones who are brought in to get the job done. Okay, to get that job done, the number one principle of public finance is you have to have people at the top who are respected by people at the bottom. They don't have to like them, they don't have to be their best friends, they don't have to socialize with them, but they have to respect them and feel that they're competent people. If they don't, the whole organization falls apart. And we all know the problems we have with putting the wrong people at the top and then watching the morale and the entire organization fall apart. And we paid the price for that at the hurricane, and we paid the price for that of being underfunded and having a governor who didn't care. So those are two things it has to do. It's got to be properly funded and properly managed.
So is your answer yes or no? Is your answer yes or no?
Repeat the question.
It says, do you think it was a good idea to move 911 from under the Virgin Islands Police Department to VITEMA?
In retrospect, it was not good. It could have been okay, but because of the way FEMA was set up, it turned out to have been a mistake. It's not per se a mistake. We can have it at FEMA and have a good 911 service, depending on how we manage it.
Okay, so if your answer is no, would you consider removing 911 from under VITEMA back to Virgin Islands Police Department?
The answer is maybe. I think it can be function properly at VITEMA with the right people in charge and the right thing. We have to give it a chance. It hasn't been given a chance at VITEMA with competent management. It's got people who have an entirely different agenda and quite literally don't care. And it's not going to work. If the people don't care at VITEMA, it won't work. If they don't care at the police department, it's not going to work. You've got to get people who care, who are sensitive to what's happening, who are responsive to people's needs, and no matter which department you put it in. You can call it whatever you want. At the end of the day, we're going to have Virgin Islanders answering the phones, setting up the systems. We got IT people taking care of it.
Since there's been so much conversation, can you repeat the question, please?
Do you think it was a good idea to move 911 from under the Virgin Islands Police Department to VITEMA? If your answer is yes, please explain why. If your answer is no, would you consider removing 911 from under VITEMA back to Virgin Islands Police Department?
I believe it was a good idea, and this is why I say so. Uh, because of my relationship with emergency management as being part of the International Association of Emergency Managers, I was actually part of the conversations and discussions of moving 911 from police department to Vitima because it provides greater centralization for emergency calls. The police primarily deal with public safety issues, but 911 deals with fire, it deals with health, it deals also with the police. So having a central dispatch works well. Our issues in the Virgin Islands, however, is not where it's placed. It's not that structure. It has more to do with executive management, the provision of resources, the continued training, the ensuring that the 911 areas, the central dispatch is properly staffed, that you have redundant systems going into our dispatch so that if a line is down, a call from St. John doesn't have to get bounced to St. Croix. And that if there's a call from St. Croix, it doesn't get bounced to St. Thomas. So that's what our issues are. Our issues are ensuring that we pay our bills for the telecommunication contractors, is ensuring that we have the proper training of staff, and that we properly staff what is a very vital emergency operation of the Virgin Islands.
This question is a question regarding the economy. In our community, our local businesses incur a high tax burden in addition to high overhead cost. In addition, many of them do not receive EDC benefits. What would you do in your administration to encourage the growth of small businesses?
Look, the first thing any small business needs is people with money to spend, and that's what's in short supply. Our economy is an absolute disaster. Income levels are half the national average. I've got a comprehensive proposal to bring that up. So number one, we have to bring up the economy. Most people who are working for the government, people who are working in the private sector, on average are earning half of what they would be if we had a good economy. So number one, we create a good economy. And now, all of a sudden, the problem isn't so bad. Now there are people to buy the products of small business and the services, small business. Now, there are tactical things we can do and that we must do. I'm looking at increasing the time you need. Your license is good from 1 and sometimes 2 years to 5 years, so you don't have to go in every year. You can have streamlined licensing. You can have lower the obstacles of entry to coming in and out of business. We also have highly regressive taxes. So what does that mean? That means we tax the people who can afford it the least. I've never once seen them go after people who have money when they're looking to start a tax. They'll go after taxes on the guy who's trying to get by on $30,000 a year. He comes home and he goes to have a beer and he has to pay a tax on it. It's like, what is this? Okay, and it's just, I've been here 15 years. It bothers me as a matter of conscience. That's not the way you run a healthy economy. And I've got a full, comprehensive economic plan, and hopefully we'll be able to get to it later.
Can you repeat for me, please?
Absolutely. In our community, our local businesses incur a high tax burden in addition to high overhead costs. In addition, many of them do not receive EDC benefits. What would you do in your administration to encourage the growth of small businesses?
One of the first things that the Smith-Frederick administration would do is really look at what's required to incubate small businesses. Among that would be utilizing the skills and expertise of my lieutenant governor, who is an expert banker, an insurance person, and a small businessman himself here on St. Croix. What is lacking for many people to start business is good technical support. One has to do with the ability to write good plans and have good proposals and approach the financing. So we have to deal with banking and insuring, because the banks have to have the type of advocacy of a lieutenant governor who's charged with this to open up capital to flow so that small businesses have access to capital to start. Now, there are certain overhead issues that must happen. One is that we have one of the highest costs of living around energy of anywhere. So if you're a small business, if you rent, then you have the challenge of paying your WAPA bill. One thing that the government, we also would do, would look at using government buildings to support and subsidize the overhead costs of rent. Because among the highest costs are the cost of technical support, the cost of energy, and the cost of the space for them to operate from. We have to have a whole new culture around small businesses and really look at growing the economy from the ground up and provide the kind of support and education that small businesses need in order to be successful.
Of the teams running, Dwight and I are the ones who have the small business backgrounds. I'm a second generation small business owners. My parents were small business owners. In Charlotte Amalie, I'm a small business owner individually with my private law practice as well as with my late husband. And Dwight's parents are small business owners. They've owned a family business here for over 40 years on St. Croix. So we know what it takes to establish small businesses and to continue to keep them in operation with the doors open. And what's important is our administration will be extremely business friendly. As Mr. Mosler said, we have to reduce the time involved in obtaining a business license and renewing. It's ridiculous. Now it's 4 to 5 months to actually obtain a business license and even more to renew the business license, which is shocking. And it all starts with the Department of Licensing and Consumer Affairs. Instead of having people run all over the island to all these different departments, fire, health, IRB, we should have in DCLA itself all the entities with representatives at a physical location so that people can actually come there, do all that is necessary right there at one place, and also to apply online and have the government entities work together online so people don't have to be inconvenienced in leaving their offices and driving up and down the islands on these terrible roads. Also, we have to deal with the issue of energy, and we have a plan to reduce the energy costs. How? Through renewable energy. That's a big push. But also we have to have more money available. And under the Lieutenant Governor's office, my running mate's office will be banking, of course. And our platform is that we solicit more banks here so we have competitive rates, because money needs to be available to help the individual or the family or group of individuals establish a small business, whether through themselves or through a family corporation. So there must be more money available, and we will bring banks here. Thank you.
Excuse me.
Question: to reduce the number of commissioners, would you consider returning certain departments under one operation and identify an assistant commissioner for each department? For example, waste management was moved from under Public Works.
As a former senior executive in government and understanding the inner operations of government, it's clear that there are certain areas of government that must be reformed. We have a comprehensive plan to fundamentally restructure the operation of government to make it business efficient and focused on the purposes of which these agencies and departments have been legislated. Now, what that would require would be the Smith-Frederick administration would send down legislation within the first 100 days to comprehensively reform the government of the Virgin Islands operations. So the short answer is yes. We would support that. We would look at them cluster by cluster. We will ensure that our transition team is in line with that vision so that upon our inauguration, we will develop and structure the legislation that would go down. Now, what that would also require would be realigning the budget, because the only way that we will see efficiencies and realize the cost savings is to ensure that we take a lot of the waste, duplication, redundancy, and those things out from government operations. So not only would we reform government, we would also look at what is best placed where, and we will also look at reprioritizing those budget cost items to ensure that these things are realized. Now, that may not happen before the next fiscal year, because we go in office during the second quarter of an existing fiscal year.
To your left, to your left. Could you read the question again, please?
To reduce the number of commissioners, would you consider returning certain departments under one operation and identify an assistant commissioner for each department? For example, waste management was moved from under public works.
Nothing is off the table, but I think we are so disappointed with waste management that we are looking at ways to become more efficient in dealing with our garbage, with our sewage problems. Waste management now has a budget of close to $25 million in the new budget. And what is shocking is the lack of accountability. And that's what our administration will demand: financial accountability and transparency. Since that authority was created, we have gotten dirtier. We have more litter all over our islands. Our sewage problems have exacerbated. So they have not solved the problem. We used to do recycling, and we've gone backwards. So what has to be done is we have to have competent people at the head of all these agencies, and that's what Dwight and I will have. As a trained lawyer and a former judge, I deal with experts all the time. We will have experts in these different positions who are dedicated to serving the people of the Virgin Islands. We have money coming in, and we have money generated in revenues locally. But unless we stop the waste, misuse, and abuse of the people's money, there will continue to be waste. There will continue to be all these leaks. We will go in, we will plug up the leaks, and we will do so with expert teams, making sure we audit each department, find out where the money's leaking out, stop the waste, fraud, and abuse. And then once we start plugging up these leaks, we see what money we have that we can work with. But my concern is we are in financial straits right now.
Okay, if I remember the question, the answer is yes. There has to be, there will be consolidation. And there's consolidation for efficiencies. Now, let me give you an example that I came across. I was talking to people at Port Authority, David Mapp, in fact, a while back, and we were talking about the fees they charge the cruise ships, which was $13 and something, which highly offends the cruise ship companies to the point where they leave and go somewhere else, and we lose the business. So I said, well, how much does a cruise ship passenger spend? He said it's $270 a day. I said, so we're giving up the revenues that we get on all that spending for $13. Why can't we just lower the fee to whatever they want, $7 or $8, and bring the cruise ships back? He said, well, Port Authority needs that revenue to be able to pay its personnel. They can't get funding out of the general fund. Right, well, I said, if we get funding out of the general fund is going to make back 3 or 4 times that. By having the extra cruise ship passengers from the extra cruise ships. He says, yeah, I know, but the government just doesn't have the coordination to do that, right? And so that's why it's critical to get everybody working together. It's not just that one thing. It's everywhere you go, there are efficiencies to be gained by consolidating our accounting systems and consolidating our management systems. So I think the short answer is yes to your question.
This question is an education-related question. Should students be required to pass an exit exam to obtain a high school diploma?
That's a good question. A student in the audience is saying yes. I don't know. I'm on the fence with that because students are working diligently from actually kindergarten towards high school to get this high school degree, but definitely from ninth grade. And if the student is aware that there will be this exit exam beginning in ninth grade and is able to prepare for it, that may be something that can be worked out. But my concern is that what are we grading for? Are we grading for whether the child reads to grade level, does math to grade level, 12-year competency? So what are we going to be grading? So as I mentioned, I'm on the fence. I'm very disappointed that the kids' count studies show that as of 11th grade, over 60% of our students don't read to grade level. The math scores are not very good as well. So we are not graduating students who are very competent in math and reading. But is really the issue testing them at the end of 12th grade, or better preparing them to read? And that's where our administration will put a lot of emphasis in, is preparing them to learn to read from pre-K at least into kindergarten, and then all the way through high school, helping those who fall behind to actually read to grade level, and also with math as well.
Okay, well, look, it all depends on what we put on that test at the end of the year, because right now you need to have certain requirements to get passed on to the next grade. And so if you're getting passed on from third grade to fourth grade, there's a certain requirement. If you get passed on from 11th to 12th, there's a certain requirement. And once you get through your diploma through 12th, there's a certain requirement. So they're meeting the requirements all the way up. I don't think we're talking about going back to test them to see if they remember what they learned in second grade. And so it's not, I don't quite understand what the problem is. If the problem is they're getting passed from grade to grade without knowledge that we'd like them to have, and then at the end we catch up and try and say, okay, for the last you've got to go back and do your last 5 years over again. No, this has to be done 1 year at a time, 1 quarter at a time, 1 test at a time, and then if you don't get through the year up to standard, for my 32 seconds, you can then have a summer school, which is what we used to have, to try and get you up to grade so that you can get passed on to the next grade. So anyway, that's the way I look at it.
My short answer is yes. We live in a competitive world. We live in a world where standards and rigor and having a bar means something. Although it may not mean something to some around the political space. I'll give an example. I have a family member that's a teacher here in St. Croix, and one of the most fundamental complaints that he has when we speak is that the children are graduating, particularly in his area. Some are graduating or come to him far below the bar. So when they go on to the next level, many are taking remedial classes when they should be at the freshman level, going straight toward their careers, or they are at a lower level if there's technical or vocational education that their track is. I think in order for the Virgin Islands to move forward, there must be a higher bar. We have to look at excellence, and excellence always should be our standard. So anything that supports excellence is what the Smith-Frederick administration will look at. Now, we'll provide the support. We'll provide the parenting skills, the after-school programs. We'll provide the funding for the arts and music and athletics to make sure that we graduate well-rounded, confident, young Virgin Islanders who have the academic and scholastic backgrounds so that they can succeed at the next level and bring their skills back to the Virgin Islands.
There are 2 questions under healthcare. The first question, do you agree to establishing a single hospital board for the territory? Yes or no?
No.
No?
I do not, no. I think there should be an authority over both boards, but it's not a board, not another board. A management authority, but not another board. We've got enough problems with the boards we have.
Okay. Now, just a question. There's no time on this, or just a,
Do you
are
agree?
these bullet answers? I'm just trying to get what. 1:30. Okay. Okay. Can I stand? You want me to sit? Okay. Good. Okay. I'm trying to figure out. Okay. I support moving the hospitals under the University of the Virgin Islands and creating a hospital, a university system of healthcare for the Virgin Islands. So my short answer to that is yes, because that single board would be under the University of the Virgin Islands, because we would invest in our medical school, the simulation lab. We are saddled with being able to find specialists and to recruit and retain individuals in the healthcare industry. So the short answer is yes. We would support that being under the university. We would support the medical school. We will support moving our economy and diversifying our tourism product around medical tourism. We will be able to support bringing back the hundreds of millions of dollars every year that leaks from this economy and goes elsewhere because we're unable to have specialists and others. It's interesting. You know, we had a storm last year, about a year ago, and I happened to be in the hospital, and my wife worked at the hospital. We were there at the same time, when our Virgin Islanders were going into military planes and going away, because not only did we not have facility, we didn't have specialists. We didn't have specialists. So if we're going to go in a different direction, we have to really look fundamentally at how we restructure our healthcare for our seniors and our children, and also to capture that money that we need for this economy.
Would you read the question again, please?
Do you agree to establishing,
You don't need it? Okay.
do you agree to establishing a single hospital board for the territory, yes or no?
I believe that we're grasping for ideas because we're so dissatisfied with the boards that we have. That may be something we can look at in the future. But right now, we need to deal with the immediate needs of our people, which is the functioning of both hospitals and at least a functioning clinic on St. John. So we are desperately looking for answers, but let's address the immediate needs. And first of all, we have to have boards that operate and work together and look at what are the best interests of the people of the Virgin Islands, and to provide them with medical care, proper medical care. Because what is happening now is people who can afford it leave the island, and those who cannot afford stay here and suffer from the poor medical care that they can get, or unfortunately they pass away. So we need to look at addressing the immediate problems. As I mentioned, perhaps in the long term, think about creating just one board. But we have too many problems. We have to get our hospitals working. We have to get them fully staffed. And how can we do that? By working with UVI, having them opening up their nursing program. They have an excellent nursing program, but they have to have it opened up for more students to be taught nursing and to actually be staffed in our hospitals, and that we keep our nurses here. And through the medical technology programs that will be available in the middle and high school under our career and technical education programs.
There's a second question under healthcare. Back to Mr. Mosler. The second question is, what would your administration do to hold the hospitals accountable and encourage improvement of the quality of our healthcare system?
Okay, so we have two problems with our hospital, much like everything else. One is a financial problem where they're underfunded, and the second problem is a management problem. And the management problem is the same one I talked about for the rest of government, and with the same remedies. But let me skip to the financial one, because that's for the hospitals, which we haven't talked about. We in the Virgin Islands get to keep our own income taxes. So let me give you some numbers for example. Let's say the hospital pays $20 million in salaries, wages and salaries to its employees. And then out of that 20 million, maybe 5 million gets paid back to the government in income taxes. Okay, how much, and now the hospital has no money left for Band-Aids or anything else. So the hospital gets $20 million from the insurance companies for servicing sick people. It pays $20 million out to its employees. It has nothing left for Band-Aids. But that hospital is paying $5 million back to our government in income taxes. So how much did the hospital, how much did those employees actually cost the government? The government in the hospital is the same thing. It pays 20, it gets 5 back. It only costs them 15, not 20. The other 5 goes into the general fund and goes somewhere else. What I'm saying is we're taking money the hospital's bringing in through people paying, but largely through insurance. We're using some to pay people who rebate some for taxes back to the government, and the rest is going for other things. We stop doing that, account for it properly, and suddenly we can properly fund our hospitals and address our management issues.
What would your administration do to hold the hospitals accountable and encourage improvement of the quality of our healthcare system?
The first thing we will do is take a lot of this politics out of the hospital, take a lot of the politics out of healthcare. And that can only happen if we move the governance of the hospitals from its current political boards to the University of the Virgin Islands, invest in our medical school, and invest in medical tourism so that we can grow the economy, get that money, capture the funds for healthcare that go off island in the hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Now, I want to make a caveat, and that is this. As perhaps the only healthcare executive that's running for governor at this time, I feel that our issues around healthcare is not the doctors and the healthcare professionals. We have a system that is broken and fragmented. We have something called uncompensated care. We have a very high level of poverty, and because of that, we have a high number of people who cannot afford to pay, but because we have community-based hospitals, the health centers must carry that cost. So we have to deal with what we call parity with the federal government so that our Medicaid rate is on par with the federal government, with those of other states and jurisdictions. We have to deal with our ability to get good technology into our hospitals so that they can build accordingly, that they can do the charting. Now, there are some administrative and operational issues that must happen, and those cannot happen under a political climate that is toxic, that is toxic, that is toxic. So we believe that those would be the approach for the Smith-Frederick administration. Thank you.
The question again, please.
What would your administration do to hold the hospitals accountable and encourage improvement of the quality of our healthcare system?
What we will do with each department, each agency, the first thing is have a team of experts go in and begin audits. These hospitals are losing money. There is waste, mismanagement, and abuse of the money. And I know Mr. Mosler said they need more money, but we have to find out where the money is leaking out. And we have heard over the news media many, many times about their problems even billing. And we've been told by experts in the field that they do not bill for Medicare properly. We need teams of doctors and nurses who are competent, understand the very complex Medicare rules and regulations, are able to review medical records, and then have those medical records in tip-top shape so they can be coded and be billed, and so that the federal government actually will pay the bills. Because Medicare is very strict, and if it finds any problem with a medical record or a bill, it will not pay. And that has been happening. So we need to make sure we have teams of doctors and nurses on committees to review the medical records, and bills go out to the federal government so that they can be paid. There's lots of money owed for Medicare, and that's just leaking out. Plus, we need to make sure in whatever other division that all these holes are stopped up. We had also allegations of Medicare fraud. We need to look into that. Where is the money going? Stop the leaks.
Yes.
These are questions from our environmental category. Is recycling a viable option in the Virgin Islands? And that's a yes or no question. If so, what would your administration do to ensure that we begin recycling in the Virgin Islands?
The first part of the question, my answer is yes. Recycling is quite viable. The territory at one point was recycling, and for whatever the reason, we moved away from that. So the short answer is yes. A healthy environment and good health go hand in hand. Environmental health and human health go hand in hand. So we believe that what we would do would be to, first of all, enforce the law. There are laws in the books about dumping, about litter. I can't speak for St. Croix, but on St. Thomas, there is a tremendous issue with waste on the side of the street and waste management and litter. We have to enforce the law. Secondly, everything must be funded. So if we have to fund our waste management and other things, it's not just mismanagement, but it's also a lack of sustainable revenue that supports these things. Now, there was a point where we moved a lot of trash hauling away from direct government services to outsourced contracting to the tune of millions and millions of dollars a year. We would look at that and perhaps bring that service back under the government to ensure that there's direct accountability for these things being done. So I believe that a healthy environment, good air, clean water is essential. We can't talk about the health of a community without having a healthy and clean environment. Thank you very much.
The question again, please.
Absolutely. Is recycling a viable option in the Virgin Islands? And that's a yes or no question. If yes, what would your administration do to ensure that we begin recycling in the Virgin Islands?
It's a very viable option, and it must be done. We see it successfully done all over the United States. And why cannot we do it here? It falls under the purview primarily of the Waste Management Authority, which is one of those authorities that we just all wonder what it is doing with the money that's allocated to it. And now it has $25 million in its budget. What does it plan to do with those millions and millions of dollars? But recycling is a must, and because we have stopped recycling, now we have private entities and nonprofits getting involved because there's such a necessity for it. But let's look at the landfills. The landfills, both on St. Thomas and St. Croix, have been under a consent decree for years by EPA. Those need to be addressed. And what is waste management doing? We don't know, because there was just a court hearing yesterday, I believe, where the waste management's new person in charge did not show up in court, and that has been frustrating the judge. So we have an authority that is not fulfilling its mandate under law. We will go in, as with every other agency and department, begin auditing. We will have experts leading the different commissions, the different agencies, the different departments, because unless you have experts in there who know what they're doing and who are willing to commit their experience, their knowledge, their expertise to work on behalf of the people of the Virgin Islands, we are really going nowhere. And we will hold people accountable. People have to be held accountable. Thank you.
Number one, yes, recycling is viable, but it has a cost. And when you start adding up all these things we want to do and the cost, and we don't have the money, unless we can raise money, unless we can have a better economy that can generate the funds we need, it's trade-offs. So yeah, we can have recycling, but fewer school books, for the children, or we can have recycling, but the nurses have to buy their own thermometers. So everything becomes a trade-off, and it becomes a brutal trade-off with the economy we have. We've got to improve it. I hope there's some questions in there about how we're going to do that coming. Because, so the answer is yes, if we can fund it. We have another problem. I was involved with a company, Energy Answers, and before I got involved, they were involved in a project here for the waste to energy project. And they were the low bidder, and they won. But another company got the contract because the company, Energy Answers, would not pay the $500,000 bribe, kickback, whatever you want to call it, to get the contract, which the other one did, and it was done through a consulting agreement, and I think it was all caught and prosecuted and whatnot. But that's not going to happen, okay? Not under our watch. It's not what we do. I'm completely transparent, and I've only got 9 seconds. And I've, for my entire career and reputation, been based on total transparency, total honesty, obeying the law, and telling the truth. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Okay, this question is under education. Besides increasing the budget for teachers' salary and operation expenses for Department of Education, what measures would you take to help improve students' performance?
As I mentioned, it's very critical that our students be able to read and read well. It has been said that by the end of 3rd grade, prison planners plan the number of prison beds that they will establish in the future based on the level of reading of 3rd graders. Because what happens at the end of 3rd grade, our children are tested as to their reading level. Reading, or learning rather, changes when the child goes into 4th grade. It's no longer learning to read, but reading to learn. So they're tested at the end of 3rd grade. The tests locally show, the studies rather locally show, that our children, over 1/3 of them, do not read to grade level. So they continue to be promoted. They are not giving assistance, and all the way, as I mentioned before, to 11th grade, where it's up to 60% do not read to grade level. So instead of planning for prison beds, we want to plan for a future that is bright and with a lot of hope for our children. So it'll be influencing the entire community, the parents, the teachers, everyone involved in the importance of being able to read and read really well. Also, we will bring in with a big infusion, very strong infusion, the career and technical skill classes from the middle school through high school. Why would we do it from middle school? Because as a judge, that's where I saw the young men especially dropping out of school. We must prepare a skilled workforce for our future, and the only way we can really do that is training our students in the career and technical skills for the future. Thank you.
Okay, this is my most controversial proposal, and I'm asking you to think about it carefully. As a government, the budget, including federal money, is over $200 million for education, public school education, and we send something like just over 10,000 students to school on $200 million. Round numbers, it's about $20,000 a student we pay to send a student to a public school. We could send that same student to private schools for $10,000. All right? So we have to ask, what sense does it make to spend $20,000 on each student to send them to a public school when that same child we could pay $10,000 and they could go to any private school for free? And you get back to things like the churches are all like praying for this, because that means every church could open up their own private school. If they have 50 students, they're going to get $10,000 each for these students. That's $500,000. They can do that. They've got the building, they've got the teachers, they're going to be held to the same standards and everything else. And I think you can make the logical argument that the level of education would improve if we had this happen. Okay, you'd get a lot more children going to the private schools than the public schools. The public schools would still be there. Teachers would be in demand because there would be smaller classes, so you need more teachers for the same number of students. And, a minute and a half, I couldn't do it. Sorry. Anyway, it's on my website.
Under the topic of education, besides increasing the budget for teachers' salary and operation expenses for the Department of Education, what measure would you take to help improve students' performance?
as a product of educators. My mother was a teacher, a special ed teacher, a special ed counselor, as well as a school nurse. Education was always the basis in our family. I know that teaching is a labor of love. It's not something people do for the salary. It's hard work, and we have to pay folks, but they do it not for the salary. The hours and the labor they put in go way beyond what the compensation is. The first teachers of any student, of any child, is their parents, or their parents. And therefore, we have to invest in families and invest in supporting families. We have a lot of single-parent homes with a lot of stress just on living. So we will invest in after-school programs, prevention programs, early education. As a former human services executive, these are the emphasis that we know help everyone develop. We have to decide what is the product of this child that we want to produce for the Virgin Islands, and that is courageous, confident, educated, and ready children to meet the world, to pursue their ambitions, but come home. So we have to also provide an environment for our children to come back and work. We can't just look at education as though it's two-dimensional. It's not just about getting a grade and they passing them on, but they have to be able to come back in an environment that they can pursue their ambition and help us develop the Virgin Islands. Thank you.
This question is as to our economy. Do you believe that the deal between the government and Lime Tree Refinery is beneficial for our economy?
The jury is out on that one. There are certain structural problems with the deal, but to say it's not good for the economy, I guess time will tell. Time will tell. When you're in a position that we have made decisions around financial and economic development that puts you at a disadvantage over a period of time, then you have little leverage to negotiate deals that would be overly beneficial. I think, number one, that there should have been more emphasis on healthcare, that there should have been funds identified to help build our hospitals, to build our clinics. There should be more monies in there, in that as a set-aside for education. Those things would have supported our economy because we have tremendous amounts of money that leak out for those particular things. There was also some non-disclosure or questionable disclosure that went on in that deal, and that is the nature of the $70 million and whether or not the people and the public really knew that that was somewhat like a hard money loan to the people of the Virgin Islands with high interest if they pursue not to move forward with it. But in terms of whether it's beneficial for the economy, I think the jury's out. I think that time will tell. I believe that our legislature needs to exercise some muscle and ensure that it's well monitored and well put in place. But there should have been better things in there for health care of the people. Thank you.
Would you repeat the question, please?
Yes. Do you believe that the deal between the government and the Lime Tree Refinery is beneficial for our economy?
I took a very cautious position. As a lawyer, I read the proposed agreement, and I was very concerned. There were a lot of tax giveaways, not only to Lime Tree Bay and ArcLight, but also to their customers. And I don't believe people understood how many taxes were being forgiven. Why should the customers of Lime Tree Bay and ArcLight have been given tax exemptions? So coming back to the fact we have small businesses here who are struggling and paying gross receipt taxes up to 5% a month. And yet customers of Lime Tree and ArcLight are getting tax exemption. In my mind, something's wrong, very wrong with that picture. But I believe that the legislature should have taken their time. They were put under a lot of pressure, and this is a pattern that governors have been doing, putting the legislature under extreme pressure. They had 2 weeks to review an agreement like that. They had their legal counsel write an opinion. They did not heed that opinion. They did not provide her opinion to the public to read. They actually obtained an expert opinion. I understand paid a lot of money for that, and the expert really raised a lot of issues with the proposed agreement. They didn't pay heed to what the expert raised as really points that they had to review and were of great concern. And then again, the legislature did not make that expert opinion available to we the people. I think it's going to be very problematic into the future, but we need to make sure that they live up to whatever the agreement is.
Okay. Let me just point out that if you're selling lime tree oil as a customer and you have to pay a 5% gross receipts tax on a $70 barrel of oil, there isn't going to be a refinery. It's not going to be there, which maybe we don't want it there. But the gross receipts tax is a very, it eliminates a lot of businesses by being here. If you're in any kind of a trading business where you buy and sell for small margins and there's a gross receipts tax, you have to locate somewhere else. So it's not quite as simple as it sounds. Okay. Lime tree, as it stands, is good for the Virgin Islands economy. It's a move of desperation. There are other things that are better, but we were unable to get those. The government was unable to, and so it had no choice but to go with, take whatever it could get. However, the contract it had, the 2015 contract, was a much better contract for the economy than the one they got. And to get the one they got the way they got it was by having the governor and Lime Tree conspire to lie to the Senate, had the PSA was lying to the Senate, to mislead the Senate, to deceive the Senate, to trick the Senate into not knowing what it was voting for, and get the bill passed. Okay, this is corruption that's a level worse than bribery. I was the one who identified it and pointed it out. I've sent a complaint to the AG. None of the other candidates are even talking about this. If you have any ounce of anti-corruption in you, please support this effort I'm trying to put forth. Thank you.
Can I have the opportunity to rebut? I wanted to rebut something that you said, Mr. Mosler. The agreement says all taxes. It doesn't say just gross receipt taxes that customers of Lime Tree and ArcLight are excluded from. So that is extremely unfair. I pointed out gross receipt taxes for small businesses, but the customers of ArcLight and Lime Tree are exempt from all taxes.
I just gave gross receipts as an example because you brought it up. I could go through the others, but I'd say we move on to the next question. It's the same principle.
We're like doing a postpartum on something that already died. The issue here is that the government has been at a disadvantage with our economic position because we can't go to the bond market. We have very much issues with our cash flow, and it's underpinned now by the levels of mismanagement from the executive level, so we are negotiating from a position of disadvantage. Now, because of that, we have a number of things that are questionable. The $70 million loan, whether it's all taxes or gross receipts, it's an issue of we just need to go in a different direction and ensure that we grow this economy in a way that we have leverage when we're making these kind of deals. Thank you.
Question. For years, most public schools in the Virgin Islands were marred by maintenance issues that have now become major hurricane damage. What would your administration do to ensure that this does not continue in the future?
That's a very good question because both my running mate and I are very much experienced in construction and maintenance. My late husband, Gordon Coffelt, was a contractor, and I did many construction contracts for him and the various companies and construction projects. I know a lot about construction, about maintenance, renovations, and Dwight is an engineer. What we would do is make sure that the buildings are reviewed by experts in the fields, that their reports are done, that they're properly maintained, and there's a plan, that there's foresight, and we're proactive, and we're not leaving it for the last minute to wait until school starts to then discover there are all these problems with the buildings and their structures. But importantly, let's go back to the building of the schools in the first place. The PFA audit from 2017 that the Department of Interior Inspector General's office issued said there was a $17 million cost overrun for 3 public schools. So why did that happen? Think about it. A lot of corruption, a lot of money leaking out. Were these buildings actually built properly in the first instance? Dwight and I are into making sure that whenever there's a construction project going on, we have inspectors daily there at the construction site, making sure that the construction contracts are followed, I's are dotted, T's are crossed, but actually on the field that everything is done properly. Otherwise, we'll be shortchanged. Thank you.
Before the hurricane, it was my understanding that deferred maintenance was $2 billion in the school system. So it was already impossible under the economy we had. Cost overruns come about often because the job goes to the lowest bidder who deliberately underbids it below what it's going to cost. And then when the real costs come out, you're faced with paying the extra money. All these things are complicated financial things. I've been in finance for a long time. I saw the first Hovensa deal go through, and we left $150 million on the table. Paul Singer was in control of Hovensa. He was my client for 30 years. The last thing he wanted was me on the other side of that trade. I asked Governor DeYoung to participate. They turned me down. I think it's because they know I'm transparent and identify corruption. So back to the question on the schools and the buildings, I come to the same conclusion that $200 million we're spending per student, if you add back the deferred maintenance, the amount we should be spending is probably $250 or $300 million. It's probably $30,000 a student. We can send our children to the private schools for $10,000 a student. And you bring back the students become important, because now all of a sudden, all these cute little children have $10,000 checks on their collars to whichever headmaster can attract your students. So now the headmasters and the pastors are talking to the parents, talking to the students, and trying to sell their school to those students. It changes the whole dynamic.
Let me address, what I've heard circulating for a little bit first. There is value in public schools. There is tremendous value in public schools. I would never support gutting out public schools, because the fact is it costs much more than $10,000 per student for the higher tier private schools. So we have excellent teachers in schools. We have standards that private schools aren't held to. And I would never support putting our teachers on the street. So let's get back to the question. We have to right fit our government, because it's not just the schools that are that are not well maintained. It's also government offices, government buildings. If you go to the motor vehicle office in St. Thomas, it's damaged now, but before it was damaged, I was there one day and the rain came, and everyone there had to jump on a car because the place was in a flood zone and it flooded out. We have to right fit government. There is no easy answer about how we go about maintaining what has not been maintained for many years. We have an opportunity now to rebuild schools, and I think that we really need to look at, as we rebuild these schools, putting the right percentage of labor and the right percentage of maintenance costs aside to ensure that we maintain our schools. It may help if we bring back vocational programs, so that as we maintain our schools throughout the year, throughout the summers, our students are part of that. Our students are part of that. Now, we just have to think outside the box, but under no circumstances would I not support public schools.
I wanted to rebut something that Mr. Mosler said. Go right ahead. I think, Mr. Mosler, you oversimplify these construction contracts. It's not that if they're not well planned or well bid, it's up to the government to make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. And that we would make sure, our administration would make sure we have attorneys who know about properly putting together construction contracts so that we are not stuck with any type of a structure that is built that is not proper. And they will be properly designed, they will be properly built according to contract, and we will have inspectors monitoring them. But that's where the corruption comes in. You talk about corruption, we talk about corruption all the time. But as a lawyer and a former judge, I can tell you, I bet you I know more about corruption than you do. But the corruption is in these contracts, the underbidding, and then the government having these change orders all the time. The change orders are ridiculous, and that adds the cost onto the contracts, which we should not be having. And in our corruption-free government, we will not have these continual change orders upon change orders that make the cost for the building of the structure exorbitant.
No, I think she made my point very well, so.
I guess since everyone's in a rebuttal phase, I'll just make a statement because I don't have a nickel in that dime. As interim acting Deputy Commissioner for Human Services, I oversaw capital projects. I've actually overseen at least 20 different construction projects in government. And all of our projects came in at budget or below and on time. Our issue is management. Now, if you're managing your capital projects, there is only 25% by law that a change order can go beyond. And if it doesn't, that means that there's poor contract administration. If we don't spec our jobs properly, we have these problems. So each are saying the same thing, but our issue is management. Our issue is executive oversight. Our issue is putting the right people who have the experience, the competence, and the skills in government to ensure that the stewardship of government is done in a way that supports the best interests of the people. For example, we built a library when everyone is moving toward internet books. So we have a library now that may never see students because that library is outdated, but we spent almost $30 million. Thank you.
Let me address a couple of his earlier points. Number one, on the cost of the private schools. I went to the private schools. The most expensive was Antilles, something like $15,000. And I asked them if every student was funded with $10,000, would you be okay? 500 students, $5 million. They said yes. They charge more because they give scholarships to students who have nothing. But on average, 10,000 would be okay. Now, this was a year or so ago. It may have crept up a little bit. Same thing with Country Day, who is the most expensive here. 14,000, could you get by with 10,000, 500 students, $5 million? They said yes, look forward to that. They'd be very happy with that. So, and the other schools charge less. When you go to Free Will Baptist or St. Patrick's, they're charging some only 4,000, 5,000, and 6,000. They're being subsidized by the church. They'd be very, very happy to take all the students they could at $10,000. And if 10,000 turns out not to be the right number and it turns out to be 11 or 12, it's fine. The real number for public school, when you include the deferred maintenance, is 30,000 or more. Now, when you talked about teachers being put out on the street, I'd already mentioned the fact that the class sizes are smaller in the private schools. You have the same number of and so you'll need more teachers for the same number of students, not fewer teachers. So teachers become in demand.
Well, our time is up. Let me see how much questions we had left in the...
All the economy will
Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give each one of you a question. Pass it down. And then I have 3 more left, and that will work it out. But we're going good. Just have a few more minutes. Are you in favor of legalizing the medical, recreational marijuana use? And as such, the potential boost, you think it'll be a potential boost for our economy?
Number one, I think it could be a small boost to the economy, but I don't think that's the important consideration. we have federal laws, and there's nothing we can do about those. So if the federal government wants to enforce their marijuana laws, that's fine. I don't think we should have local laws against marijuana. I think it's like a negative for our economy. It's a source of crime. The price goes up. I don't like marijuana. I don't use it. I'd be happy if nobody used it. But when you make it illegal locally and you spend our resources fighting it and drive the price up, you're funding criminals, you're funding all kinds of activity we don't want to happen. I think, and for me personally, again, I'm against it on a social level, but I don't think the police department is the right place to enforce my beliefs. I think the right place to enforce my beliefs is through the churches, through the social agencies, the same way we do for alcohol, and not the court system and the criminal justice system. I agree there's a lot of dangers to the drug and whatnot, but again, it's not a police matter. It doesn't work. It makes things worse instead of better. I wouldn't do it.
And the winner is, prior to the hurricanes, economic growth in the territory was stagnant. What steps would your administration take to encourage innovation and investment? The first step you take is to ensure that you have competent, experienced leadership. Because like with any company, investors look at your management team and your management staff. So if we don't have competent, committed, disciplined, well-qualified leadership, it's going to be hard to get investments to come here. They need to have confidence in the fact that we will do the things we say we're going to do, that we're going to be transparent, we're going to be honest. If we say it's X, we will do our part in good faith to make it X. Now, technology, healthcare, we are very much strong on healthcare. Technology, healthcare, and the right sizing of government would be those things that would attract investments. The next thing that we would look at is moving all of these financial services areas under the Lieutenant Governor's office, because we have an expert in banking and insurance that can bring innovation to these areas so that financial services areas, banks, and others will feel confident to release capital into our economy. You can't grow your economy without money, and you must get that by having competent leadership. Secondly, we have to weed out these things called corruption. But instead of saying that, what we must do is ensure that we support the Inspector General's office, expand their role, and ensure that there are inspectors generals to handle the clusters of government areas. That will be our approach. Thank you.
My question is, do you believe that resources are distributed equitably across St. Thomas, St. John, and St. Croix? If not, what would you do to ensure that resources are distributed equitably in your administration? No, I believe they're not distributed equitably, and that's from my traveling throughout the islands, talking to the people, seeing what services are available. And it is very upsetting to me. I go to St. John and I see how the clinic there providing immunizations to children is closed. That provides immunizations to families that are of low income. And what are they forced to do? Get on a ferry and come all the way to St. Thomas and drive across St. Thomas to Niski Center, which is it's a big impediment. I see what is happening, has been happening on St. Croix for years as a result of Havenza closing. And I say this, I'm a mother of 2 sons, so I look at it as a mother, but I would have 4 children. And what do we do as a parent when one child needs additional help? Let's say, for example, the child is having issues, problems with a class in school. The parent starts focusing on that child that's having issues. That does not mean that the parent loves any of the other children less, but just focusing on that child for a period of time to help that child. And that's how I see St. John and St. Croix. Of course, I'm from St. Thomas, but that's how I see St. John and St. Croix, as suffering, needing the attention of a governor who has compassion and care and is willing and able to infuse the necessary capital into both these islands. Thank you.
Okay, I know each of you didn't get to answer each of you had your own special question, but I want to pose this to everyone as a retired police officer and experience dealing with responding to mental health patient. I had to end up shooting a mental patient myself, and that was because, and also I was disarmed by a mental patient in the hospital because I wasn't trained to deal with a mental patient in the right capacity, because I'm trained to deal with the regular people, not mental patients. So my question is, would you agree to establish a mental health unit with trained staff that will be responsible for responding to 911 calls involving mental patients instead of dispatching police officers? You want me to read it? To each of you.
Yes. Oh, well, there's no doubt about that. And of course, and what I saw as a judge was the revolving door with the patients who were mentally ill, the persons who were mentally ill. And it was very upsetting to me as a judge because what would always happen, they would not take their medicine, start being harm to themselves or to the community, be picked up by the police, then put in prison or taken to the neuropsychiatric unit if that existed, then brought before the court as required by law. And as a judge, I was required to release them once they were safe to themselves and the community, and required that they follow up. But the Division of Mental Health was never properly funded, and I've left the bench over 15 years, and the complaint was always, Judge, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough money. We still hear the same thing, we don't have enough money. We must put our resources in those areas that are a priority and help those people that desperately need help. And we have let our homeless and the mentally ill persons really suffer, and they should not suffer like that. They should not be held in jail. We must have an effective unit to have them treated, and those who have to be there long term be treated effectively. And we have to stop sending our juveniles who have been diagnosed with mental health issues off island and spend millions and millions of dollars treating them off island. Bring them home, have a mental health unit here to treat them.
The short answer is yes. But the proof is always in the proof of the pudding is in the taste. What I have done as a healthcare executive is expand mental health and behavioral health in my organization. We brought in psychologists, we brought in psychiatrists, we expanded these services because instead of complaining that there are not enough in government, we went out and found the resources, brought the resources here, and ensured that our people get the help that they need. Now, how can this happen? Is that you put the right leadership with competence, experience. Government operation is not easy. We can talk about it. But you have to know government. You have to have experience in it. And only the Smith-Frederick team has that balance of experience and direct knowledge of operating in government at a very, very high level. We need to right-fit our government, and we need to do so in a way that supports the mission of government. Our healthcare system is broke. And any conversation that does not include fundamentally revamping and making a continuum of healthcare is a conversation that's really not based in the reality that we live in. So we believe, and I strongly support, having a mental health unit, but a mental health unit by itself is insufficient because after they go out, they have to have a place to refer these people to. And they have to have a place to have the support and the training. So yes, we do support that. Thank you.
Okay, so my answer, of course, is yes, I support that and so many other things. And at the same time, we're faced with the reality of a Senate that's appropriating money it doesn't have year after year that never gets funded because it doesn't exist. And so we didn't get to these kinds of questions, but I've identified large chunks of money that we can realistically bring in, $50, $100 million pieces of savings to get to $300 or $400 million a year we need just to turn this into a normal type of community. And we've been deprived of these funds for a long time. When we did have them, we squandered them and wasted them several years ago. And to me, that's what it's all about. Now let me see if I can take a few notes here. we talked about banks. We are being redlined as a community by the major banks. I've applied for loans against AAA collateral down here with high levels of income from JP Morgan, BBVA, Wells Fargo, Bank of America. They've all flatly turned it down. The regulators will not permit the large banks to lend here. Now, it's illegal, but the federal regulators, the FDIC, doesn't care. And so that problem has to be addressed from the top. We have to go through the Department of Interior with our delegate and get, bring attention at the highest levels. The head of the Department of Interior is a cabinet level position, and get this changed. And if I had more time, I could go through the whole thing, but thank you very much.
This is one last question, is yes or no? Do you agree to developing a redundancy plan where each district can run all government agency in the event of another disaster? Like what happened, we were at a standstill because everything ran in St. Thomas. So would you agree in having a redundancy where St. Croix could run the government as a backup? Is yes or no? Because we have to wrap up.
1,000% yes.
Look, yes, it's unthinkable to have it any other way. That's the normal way to do it. Yes, yes, yes.
Yes.
Okay, and I'm sorry that I couldn't get you all to go into more, but we ran out of time, and I really appreciate you all being here. And now I'll give each of you 2 minutes to say what you wanted to say, Mr. Mosler, and the rest of you. So stop.
Independent candidate for governor, lucky number 7 on the ballot, running with Ray Fonseca from St. Thomas, asking you for your vote. I have comprehensive plans so that we can properly fund the GERS and make sure everybody gets paid with no increases in contributions and no cuts in benefits. We didn't talk about tax refunds, which is just your change. You've overpaid the government. They owe you the change. It's unconscionable that this isn't being paid. That will be in place at the same time. And I have to emphasize that you have to have clean government. It starts with corruption is something that no government can overcome. We've had a blatant case of corruption here with the lime tree situation. Senator Roach, who's running with Senator Bryant, cross-examined Val Collins and drew out of them an admission that they have lied to the Senate. And yet there's nobody doing anything about it. It's cost us hundreds of millions of dollars in future revenues, and it's just being left alone.
Thank you for this opportunity, and I'm hoping that it provides your students with a good look at civics. Moleto A. Smith Jr. running with Hubert Lorenzo Frederick, number 6, on November 6th on your ballot. www.sf2018.net is our website. It's very simple when you boil it down for this election cycle. We either go back to the past and bring back political types who've brought us to a point of collapse. Simple as that. We look at our current situation and we determine whether we like status quo, and there's a lot of human pain. Or we move forward into the future with a revived healthcare system, with individuals who are experts in banking and insurance. The only lieutenant governor who could fit the qualifications as commissioner of insurance as what is required by law. We look forward in that direction, and I ask you that Smith Frederick is the only team for that future. Thank you very much.
I'm Soraya Coffelt, running with Dwight Nicholson. We're number 3 on the ballot. We are the team to bring victory on November 6th. We are running because we want to be public servants. We are in it not for self-service, but for public service. We had a young man come during a voter registration drive. He was a senior in high school. And I was speaking to him, talking about self-service, and I said we would agree to reducing our salaries as governor and lieutenant governor. His eyes just opened wide, and he was shocked. He said, why would you do that? Why would you reduce your own salary? I said, because the lieutenant governor and governor are paid too much money. So he was shocked. So this was a teaching moment, and that's what we are doing. We're coming in to be take self-service out of public service. We want to serve the people of the Virgin Islands, not for ourselves, but for the people. We have the experience, we have the desire, we have the hope, we have the vision. Again, we're number 3 on the ballot. Thank you very much.
We're running out of time, really. I want to thank everyone that came out. I want to thank the candidates for taking time out. I want to also mention that Senator Millen Young contacted me earlier and said she was stuck in St. Thomas and couldn't make it. But the rest of you came, and I really appreciate it. Those are the ones that confirmed my invitation, and I want to thank them. I want to thank Chivonne Thomas. It's attorney Chivonne Thomas and Verdell Peterson. Both of them agreed to be